share the slides?
Yes. Sorry, just a moment.
Well, while we're doing that, why don't I welcome everybody? Thanks everybody for coming. We're very happy to have you here. The goal of this session is to introduce people who may not be familiar with the California Policy Lab to what we are and what we do, and with a special focus on how we can be useful to researchers who may want to work with our data. Okay, why don't we go ahead to the...
Sorry, so I was
That's all right.
not the right view.
If people can, while we're getting the slides going, if you could introduce yourselves in the chat, just so we kind of have a sense of who's here. If you could tell us your name, your campus, if assuming you're at UC, your department, just to give us a sense of who's here. And as we go, feel free to add any questions to the chat. Okay, so I think we're ready to get going. Another thing to say is that if you have any questions you want to follow up with after this meeting, you can write to info@capolicylab.org, and we will follow up there. We'll share the slide deck. We're also recording this, and we'll make it available to people who want to see it. But as I mentioned, our goal here is to introduce the Policy Lab and describe how you can work with us as a researcher, as a faculty, or as a graduate student. To provide an overview of the data that we work with and the other resources that we provide. And the reason we're doing this is because our goal is to bring in a wide and diverse network of researchers who can use the data and deliver more value than we would be able to do ourselves. Why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so our agenda today, just a brief overview. We're going to talk about CPL and how you can work with us. And we'll then talk about the different ways that you could work with us, about the data opportunities that we have. These are data sets that we have developed or been able to gain access to in ways that make it feasible for us to bring in other researchers. We'll talk about some of the linkages that we've put together among different data sets. We'll talk about other resources that we have for affiliates beyond just access to data. And then we're going to spend a few minutes talking about some recent developments at the state IRB, which has to approve most of our projects, and has had some concerning trends recently that we wanted to kind of bring people up to speed about. And then we'll end by wrapping up. Okay, and we'll give some time for questions then. But again, as I mentioned earlier, feel free to put questions in the chat as we go. We have a number of people on the call who can answer them as we go. Okay, why don't we go to the next slide? So the Policy Lab is a center that we started about 7 years ago. It's housed jointly, unusually, at Berkeley and UCLA. We have staff and teams at both places. And we have affiliates and ongoing projects at all of the other UC campuses as well. And we also have some projects that involve non-UC people, but we're really trying to serve the entire university. And I think we're actually, just this year, I think we've reached the point where we have projects from all the campuses. Okay, next. Our mission is to bring the research expertise that the university has to state and local government in California to help make that research useful for policy in the state to impact the way government works. We do that by forming partnerships with government agencies where we really work closely together, where we work with them to identify what their research needs are and how we can help meet them. And then once we've identified those needs, we conduct that research, we bring the rigor that we all know from our own academic work, bring it to the agencies. We try to break down the silos that sometimes keep agencies from working together and that may interfere with the ability to understand whether programs are really working. And along the way, we build the data infrastructure we need to do all of that work. Again, with the long-term goal of improving programs and policies that affect Californians. Next slide. This is not our whole team. This is just the people you'll be hearing from today. I'm a professor at Berkeley in the Goldman School of Public Policy and Department of Economics. My counterpart at UCLA is Till van Wachter in the economics department there. He unfortunately was affected by flight delays and wasn't able to join this today, so you won't be hearing from him, but he leads the UCLA office. You'll also be hearing from the executive directors of both of the sites, Jamie Roundtree at UCLA and Evan White at Berkeley, who are really the ones who have built the lab. And then you'll be hearing from three of our research managers who just happens to be all from Berkeley for this call. Nikta Akavan, Jennifer Hogue, and Molly Picard, who will talk about some of the individual data sets for which they are the most expert. Our research managers are the people who interface with the agencies we work with our agency partners. And so they're often the first kind of point of contact if you're a researcher trying to understand a data set or understand what an agency might be interested in. And they also know the data sets as well as anybody. Okay, next slide. So let me talk a bit about, I think we skipped one. Did we? No? Okay. There we go. Okay. So what does CPL do? I mentioned that we're all about cultivating partnerships with California government agencies. We go to state and local agencies. We go to them and we say, we're researchers. We're really interested in improving policy. We'd love to work with you. We want to make sure that what we do is useful. We're not in the business of taking your data and going right in a paper that you never hear from us again. We want to work closely with you. When we develop those partnerships, we work with the agencies to develop research agendas, and we conduct the research, and we work closely with them to make sure all along the way that the work we do is useful to them. That involves ongoing back and forth, a lot of work that will never make it into an academic paper, but that we think is useful for the agencies and helps to build expertise within the agency and make sure that the work we're doing does help them. A lot of our work, we often find our sweet spot is when there are topics that span areas where there's one agency that runs a program and is interested in impacts, but the impacts don't show up in that program, they show up in other programs. And so we often are connecting silos across different issue areas, linking data from a program to the other data set that might have the impacts it has. Along the way, we do a lot of work to clean and curate the data that the agencies have in their administrative data sets, turn it into something that can be useful for research. We try to build that in a cumulative way so it's available to other researchers who use that data. And then along the way, kind of all of this is part of building infrastructure that is then going to be a common good. The original kind of idea of CPL came from a realization that it was just really inefficient for each researcher to go try to develop these partnerships on their own, develop all the infrastructure on their own to do projects. It was often be 2 years from when you started to when you could actually even begin doing the research. And all of this made much more sense as a common good rather than as a private production. And so that's what the lab is designed to do, again, with the long-term goal of improving programs, better serving Californians. Next slide. This is another way of kind of expressing something similar. Our partnerships are at the center of all we do, but we use those partnerships to develop research, and then we bring the rigor and the research skills that we all have in our regular academic lives. We bring those to these agencies. A lot of what we're bringing is access to that kind of frontier research expertise. We do this in as flexible a funding model as we can, and we'll talk some more about funding as we go. But we are not a contract research shop. We try to avoid taking contracts actually for the work we do. We want to be free to tell the agencies what the data really show, not what they necessarily want to hear. And we think an important part of that is not relying on them for the funding. So most of our funding comes from federal grants, from foundations, from other outside the state and local government sector. That also means that the agencies are more able to work with us about the things that are important to them, not necessarily the things that they have funding for. We use that funding to support the research and to build the infrastructure we need. And the infrastructure we need is both on the legal side. We've developed new agreement templates that we have with all of the agencies that make it much easier to add new projects once we have an existing project. And we've also built a data infrastructure that can support all of the work. The data we work with is individual level administrative data. It's very sensitive. It's very important that we keep it secure. And so we've built our own data hub on which the work operates. It's pretty easy to use, and we'll talk more about that, but we think it's necessary for doing this work. And then the last thing we bring is we've built a communication infrastructure to be able to get the word out about the work. The goal of this work, again, is not citations or academic publications, although that's nice when that happens as well. But it's really policy impact. And for policy impact, you need to make sure that people outside the academy hear about it. And so we do a lot of work to make sure to get the word out. Okay, next slide. We work across 6 different policy areas. I tend to think of these as constituting a single thing, which I think of as social policy, but that's not how the policy world usually thinks about it. These are often treated as discrete areas that are served by different agencies that often don't work across them. So our areas are criminal justice, homelessness, social safety net, education, health, and labor and employment. And as you think about these areas, I think it'll be pretty clear that any program that we might have in one of these that's designed to help people is likely to have impacts across all of the others. And you can't really understand whether the program is working if you only have data from an agency that works in one of these silos. And so a lot of our work, again, is about building bridges across these silos so that we can see the impacts of programs across them. Next slide. Okay. So these are just some examples of the agencies we work with. We have over 50 agencies that we have ongoing partnerships with. We've listed acronym soup in this top part about the state agencies that we work with: the California Department of Social Services, the Employment Development Department. I can never remember what HCI stands for, so I'm not going to try. But the California Department of Public Health, the Franchise Tax Board, each of the 3 higher education segments, as well as the California Department of Education and the Student Aid Commission, various criminal justice agencies. Again, we try to work with the state agencies that work in all of our 6 issue areas and that might have either questions or data that are useful for understanding them. We also realize that in California, not everything is done at the state level, and so we work at the county level as well. We're not able to work with all 58 counties. We just don't have the scale for that. But we have a long and deep relationship with Los Angeles County through our UCLA office, with the county CEO, with a multi-organization homelessness initiative in LA, with more than 5 county departments, the police, the sheriff, the LAUSD, the district attorney. We try to go deep in LA. We don't go as deep elsewhere, but we go pretty close to that deep in San Francisco and Sonoma counties. And then we have more scattered relationships in other counties. But again, we haven't been able to reach all 50. We've probably gone the broadest in criminal justice, where there's just much more county roles. And so we list here a number of counties where we have criminal justice partnerships. Next slide. So I mentioned our funding model. Let me go into a little bit more about it. The idea is we're creating these infrastructure, and that is both computing infrastructure and legal infrastructure. That allows us to access and store the government administrative data that we use for our research. All the data is owned by the agencies we work with, not by us. They allow us to use it for projects that we both agree on, but we aren't allowed to redistribute it without their permission. We aren't allowed to do new projects without their permission. We want this to be a relationship of trust, not one where they're worried we're going to do something that they weren't expecting. When we have these relationships, we use the data for a variety of different kinds of projects. One kind of project I think I've already talked about is when we work with an agency and they come to us and say, hey, we really need your help with this question. And we'll start that. Other kinds of projects are projects that we initiate, where we go to them and say, here's what we think is an interesting policy question that we would like to study. We think it'd be useful for you, and here's how. Can we have permission to use your data? That, I think, is a more traditional model for academics. It's one that a lot of the agencies are pretty hesitant to participate in because they have experience with academics who kind of go ask for them for data and then never show up again. But I think the relationship of trust we've built makes it much easier for us to go to them and get them to say yes to those kinds of projects. And then last, once we have those relationships, we also can go to them and say, look, One of the reasons you don't like to work with outside researchers is because it's just so costly on your end. You have to set up all the data use agreements. You have to do new IT work to get the data. You have to answer all their questions. Let us take some of that burden off of you. And so for many of these agencies, it's much easier for them to work with external PIs through us than it is to work directly. And so we've tried to develop relationships where we can go to them and say, here's a proposal from an external PI. We'd like, we think it'd be useful for you. We think it's valuable. It can be done with the data we've already have. Will you support this? And often they're willing to say yes to that, where they wouldn't have been in the absence of this infrastructure. Our funding, we've built the lab with general operating grants from a number of generous foundations that saw the value of evidence-based policy. And we still rely on a lot of that for our work. Some of that has come also from UC. We've had funding from the multi-campus research programs, although that funding has now run out. But that kind of builds our core support. Then a lot of our funding comes from project grants. That once we've got this infrastructure in place, we can do projects that weren't possible before, and many of those projects are fundable. And so we've tried to go identify funding that can support those projects that we wouldn't have been able to get without the core infrastructure. And then we also have per project fees to users that we charge, which are really just designed to cover our marginal costs of hosted projects. That it costs us something to kind of set up the new extension to the data use agreement to provide the computing capacity you need. And we have fairly nominal costs to users to support that work. And when we can, we try to identify grant funding that will allow us to support the work. For a number, in various situations, we've been able to get rid of the per project fees because we had grant funding that covered it. We're looking for more opportunities to do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what collaboration looks like, and we're getting close to the end of my part, and I'll turn it over to some of my colleagues. The projects start in one of two ways. One is you come to us with a project you'd like to do, and we connect you with our agency partners, and we say, hey, look, this is a project that we'd like to support. Can you allow us to do it? And the other way the projects start is sometimes our partners will come to us and say, we'd like a project done. And we say, yeah, we'd like to support that, but we don't have the internal expertise or capacity to do it. And we look for affiliates who might be interested in working with the agencies. And both of those happen frequently, and I think they're both viable models. Either way, once we start with that, there's then a kind of negotiation process where the partners and the PIs try to develop the details of the project. They'll come up with a project description, which is usually just a half a page or something like that. It's a short description of what data the project will use, what the question is, what kinds of analyses will be done. We get agreement between the researcher and the partner on what that description looks like, and then we execute an amendment to the data use agreement. And in the ideal case, that doesn't have to go back to all of the campus offices that have to approve initial data use agreements and all the agency lawyers who have to do it. And so we can execute these amendments much faster than we were able to execute the original data use agreement. It's not always that fast, but it is faster. Then once we've gotten those amendments in place, you get to do the research. And we have a secure data hub that you work on. The data lives there to maintain security. But you do the research. We do a minimal disclosure review of your work before it comes off of the server, and then you put it out in the forms that you like. We offer support along the way. We offer some guidance based on our long experience working with the state IRB. We have fundraising capacity that can help raise money for the projects. We have a quality assurance processes we've developed for our internal work, and we can make some of those available to outside researchers. We have communications capacity to help get your work out to the media and to agencies that might want to know about it. We have a lot of expertise we've developed about how to link data across these agencies, and often we have linkages already that we can allow you to use for the projects. And we're gradually building the documentation that you need for these data. they're not as neat as a lot of the data that you might have worked with that have already been curated for research. And we've learned about which variables are reliable and which ones aren't, or how you can construct different things in the data. Okay. Next slide. So we've found ourselves in this situation where we're really a customer service operation, where you all are our customers, so are our agencies. We spend a lot of time every week talking to our agency partners, and so we have a good sense, I think, of how they feel about us. But we've always a little bit wondered whether we were doing a good job of serving the researchers who work with us. And we're certainly well aware of the times when we haven't done a good job, when we thought we could get a project off the ground quickly and it got stuck in data use agreement limbo for months or years. But we wanted to get a sense of what people thought. And so we did a survey recently of existing users, and we got 70 responses from existing users, which, by the way, is not all the people who are working on our projects. And in general, we were pretty happy with the responses we got. Almost everybody was satisfied or very satisfied with the services we provide. About close to half of the projects had been able to raise extramural funds from their projects, total of $5 million. That's very useful for us when we go to the university to talk about the value that we're delivering. Thus far, our data or our services have helped to support 26 dissertation papers, 19 published papers, 8 jobs in related fields, and all of those are vast undercounts of what's in the pipeline. We're only 7 years old. We're pretty new to being able to support these kinds of external research. So I think there will be many more of all of these types coming in the coming years. This was all great news for us. This is what we're trying to accomplish and why we've been putting all the time. So we're really happy about that. We realize that it will not always be as smooth as this. And so if you work with us and anything is not going smoothly, we really encourage you to let us know, and we will do our best to fix it. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to talk to others to talk about our data opportunities. I think Evan is up next.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Jesse. We can go to the next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of our data opportunities. I'm going to cover the first one, which is the UC Consumer Credit Panel. We mentioned this one first because it's our most sort of popular data offering. It's a little different from some of the other data offerings in that most of our work is done with government partners and using government administrative data. But in this case, these data come from one of the 3 nationwide consumer credit bureaus. And so we actually purchase these data, and we therefore have a little bit more flexibility in terms of who gets to use them, and we don't have to get pre-approval for projects and things like that. So what are the data? They are exactly what you would see on your own credit report. So we get that information at the person level for everybody who lives in California and a 2% national sample as well. We do not see the names of the individuals, nor do we see the names of the financial institutions that they have relationships with, but we see, anonymized identifiers for those things. We have the data quarterly from 2004 to the present. We get new quarters data usually within about a month of the end of the quarter. So it's updated frequently, and it's very close to real time. In addition to the sort of primary sample that we pull, we also get the household members of everybody in the sample, as well as any associated borrowers, so people who co-signed a loan with them or are authorized users on a credit card or something like that. We get person-level information like demographics, location, and then we also get account-level information about all of their loans and credit products and debts. So we get what the type of the loan is, what the balance is, the payment history, information about the origination. So it's very detailed data. And we've worked out an arrangement with the credit bureau where we're able to link the data at the individual level using a sort of encryption process called hashing, where we hash the PII from both sides and then link the hashed information. That process, I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later. It can be somewhat time intensive, but we have successfully done at least 3, if not 4 hashes. And right now we're working on a group of 8 more Those have been an exciting thing for some research projects. Let's go to the next slide.
And then actually oh, maybe you're going to speak over this. I just wanted to flag that there's a question about this data set um, in the comments. So maybe you're about to get to this, but it's asking about the data sets that require a UC affiliation. What are the options for non-UC affiliates?
Yeah, so for the credit panel, it does require a UC affiliation. And I guess if you're not a UC member, what I would recommend getting is a co-author who's at UC. So as long as there's one UC co-author on the project, then it can have as many non-UC co-authors as need be. There are other data sets that we work with that do not have this particular eligibility requirement. So I think this is one of the few where you need a UC affiliation. Most other data sets you do not need one. So hopefully that answers that question. We currently have over 100 projects that are either ongoing or completed using the credit panel data. Some of them focus on things you would think of like financial, consumer finance and financial well-being, but you can also use the data for looking at questions around residential mobility and where people migrate to, as well as people have studied things, on wildfires and extreme heat and other things as well. So lots of different potential topics there to study. There is a fee for accessing the data, which covers our costs in provisioning it. It only covers our costs in provisioning it, I should say. We are not allowed by the university to make a profit off of any of this. So it's just covering, the cost of our staff and keeping the data set up to date and things like that. We did get a grant for 2 years that started this month that covers the cost for anybody from UC Berkeley. So there's a UC Berkeley co-author on the project. It's free access for the next 2 years. Everybody else, it's an $8,500 project fee. We had a seed grant program in place for the last 4 years, which was great and offered opportunities, especially for graduate students to get seed grants to cover those costs. That ended recently, and we're trying to find replacement funding for that. So the link is there, and you can find more information about it online. And with that, I will pass it over to the next person.
Okay, I am speaking on the Health Data Access Initiative, or HDI. This is an effort to make healthcare data from CMS on Medicaid and Medicare more accessible. So CMS, it's pretty expensive to buy new data, can be upwards of $50,000. But CMS allows researchers to reuse data if they're at the same institution for a much more affordable fee. So CPL set up this program, Health Data Access Initiative, to take advantage of that. So we have some Medicaid data that's available for reuse now. And so if there's people if you're planning on purchasing CMS data, we would invite you to do it through HDI, because then it is much more affordable for anyone at NEUC to reuse the data. That makes it more accessible for grad students to do research using CMS data. I'll also mention that CMS did earlier this year announce changes to their reuse program and other aspects of data sharing. They've delayed that rollout, so now they say it won't be going into effect until 2026 at the earliest. So we're still putting in applications the same as we were. In the future, there might be changes depending on what policy changes CMS makes. But for now, they haven't implemented anything. And then the next data set is PERLI. This is our safety net data set on California's CalFresh and CalWORKS. So we have information on enrollment, allotment, demographics, and earnings data for all program recipients. So each data set includes at least 10 years of data, but the years vary for which component of it you're using. all of the data is de-identified and can be linked at the individual level using the hashing method that I'm talking about in a little bit. So projects that use CDSS data do require tie to CDSS program administration, and they have particular criteria that identifies what that means. But we review applications quarterly, and if applications meet that requirement, then we pass on projects to CDSS and they have the final say. I'll pass it over to Jamie to talk about LA data.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Rountree. I'm the executive director of the California Policy Labs UCLA site, and I help lead our homelessness research team. The Homelessness Research Accelerator project is a partnership with the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, and which is the host of the HMIS data in Los Angeles County, and the Homelessness Policy Research Institute based at USC. And through that partnership, we have a data sharing agreement with LAHSA to share de-identified HMIS data with researchers who can apply to use the de-identified data for projects that LAHSA approves. And so really the service that we're providing here is making sure you don't have to sign an original data sharing agreement with the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, and that you have the ability to access HMIS data that's been pre-processed and has code books and a wiki and policy history. The purpose of this is to fast track research, and we have, I think, close to 20 projects now that have been launched using this data or these data. It tends to be helpful for people who want to understand who's enrolled in different programs, how they move through programs, what their self-reported health histories are. I just want to say that we've been running these data for, I think, three years now, or maybe even 4 years. And one of the benefits that I think we really provide to researchers who are new to HMIS is helping them understand the structure of the data, but also the policy history. Obviously, homelessness services is a constantly changing environment where lots of new resources and new programs are coming online. And so to have access to the policy history to help you interpret the data and how the data is being entered over time can be really helpful. This data is accessible for members of the Homelessness Policy Research Institute. We're a member of that. So you need to join HPRI to apply to use the data. And then once you're a member of HPRI, you submit your research proposal through a 2-page form to LAHSA for approval. And then if we need to sign a data sharing agreement between UCLA and your institution, we can do that, but we have a number of those in place already. So if you have any questions about any of these processes, the best thing to do is to email this email address here, researchaccelerator@calpolicylab.org. We can help you become a member of HPRI. We can help you with your application form. We can assess whether there needs to be any kind of legal agreements in place, but hopefully not. So I encourage you to reach out if you're interested in looking at the de-identified homelessness services data in Los Angeles.
Hey everybody, I'll be talking briefly about the Los Angeles Prosecution Data Hub. Also, my name is Molly Pickard, and I am the Criminal Legal Research Manager at CPL. So the Los Angeles Prosecution Data Hub is a partnership with the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. It's a newer data set that we have. After many years of DOA negotiations, we're very excited to finally have this data set and be able to offer it to researchers. So the information is related to investigation and prosecution of crimes in all of LA County, which includes arrests, booking, charges, case dispositions, outcomes, court information, and demographics. However, it is de-identified. So there is no linking opportunities, unfortunately, with this data set, but because LA is such a large county, there's still a wealth of opportunities for research with this data set. And it is individual level. So for anyone who has been arrested and charged with a criminal offense in LA from 1996 to present, obviously the data that was kept in 1996 is not necessarily as good as the data that was kept in more recent years. So The more recent, probably last decade or so, is going to have a more robust information, but the data does go back all the way to 1996. And if you want to apply to this, we have an open application on our website, which the link there goes to. Plus, I'm sure that the links to all of these pages will be going out later. We look over the applications on a quarterly basis. However, the role of CPL in this is very much just to make sure that the project and the data are feasible, and then we pass off all the applications to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office for any final review. So we don't have any say of whether or not the project actually gets approved. That's fully in the hands of the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. I think that's pretty much most of it. If you have any specific questions about this data, you can email that email address, which also goes to me. So I'm happy to answer any questions or talk more about the possibilities of working with this data.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Hogue. I am at our UC Berkeley site, and I manage our partnerships with education agencies. For education data, we also have a data use agreement with the Santa Clara County Office of Education, which runs the data zone. And the data zone includes data from over 40 school districts, mostly located in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. This data set includes data on attendance, enrollment, discipline, and academics. And so if you're interested in accessing this data, you can work with CPL to propose a research project. To propose a research project, we coordinate with the data zone to propose these projects to participating districts, and interested districts can opt in to their data being included in the proposed study. So the data is kind of centrally managed, but the districts have the final say on whether their district's data is used for a research study. And if you're interested in using this data, you can email datazone@calpolicylab.org. So we now have, those are our kind of high-level data offerings. I just wanted to highlight a couple of projects that are using these data sets. We now have hundreds of projects using these data resources. And this slide just includes 4 examples. So the first is being led by Matt Unrath at the University of Southern California. And it's using CPL's CDSS data and data from getcalfresh.org to evaluate the impact of pre-filling the CalFresh recertification form on program retention. Rebecca Stager at UC Berkeley is using our CMS Medicaid data to document how mergers and acquisitions affect the composition of providers and patients treated by these groups and their associated healthcare utilization. Jake Grumbach at UC Berkeley and Maria Krumpenkin at Boston University are linking the UCCCP with voter data to determine if student loan debt affects voter turnout. And Finwin Prager at CSU Dominguez Hills is using the credit panel to assess the impacts of telecommuting and remote services on transportation, land use, and climate change. We also wanted to highlight some of the linked data sets CPL has created that Evan spoke briefly about earlier. So first, the aforementioned UCCCP has been linked to FAFSA data, as well as CalFresh and CalWORKs enrollments. As he also mentioned, we have several CCP linkages underway, including with housing parcel data, voter registrations, and death records. And most of these linkages, once they're created, can be reused by other researchers. Researchers who are interested in creating their own new linkage with the UCCCP, as Evan mentioned, can apply to do so on the UCCCP website. A couple other linkages I wanted to highlight that CPL has created. One we refer to as our student supports linkage. And this links education and social services data So it includes most of our education partners, so the Student Aid Commission, community colleges, University of California. We're working on adding CSU as well, the California Department of Education, and the Department of Social Services. We are also planning on adding the UCCCP to this linkage, so this is going to be very broad. We're also in the process of linking birth and death records from CDPH, hospitalization records from HCI, and social services enrollments from CDSS. And we also have linked data from San Francisco and Sonoma counties, and these span across health, housing, and criminal legal sectors. So these really support kind of our cross-policy domain area research. In the next portion of the agenda, I'll be highlighting several resources that we've developed, which you might find useful in your research. And these include data discovery tools, IRB resources, and our hashed linkage toolkit. So CPL's administrative data webpage, and the URL for the webpage is there on the screen. This is a primer of what data is available at the state and local level that we're aware of. It provides a quick sense of what agencies have micro level data that can be accessed, and there's a column that describes the data access process. Some of these agencies have more formal request processes, and others are more informal and require relationship building. And these are not necessarily data sets that we hold or agencies that we have relationships with. This is just meant to provide kind of a sense for the universe of possibilities. We also maintain an internal wiki that gives an overview of our current partnerships and the data sets that we have access to. And you can get access to the wiki by emailing the address here, datawiki@calpolicylab.org. Specifically, the data wiki gives an overview of what years of data we have, what the data is, what our ongoing projects are, what linkages we have, and also a point of contact that you can reach out to with questions. And finally, we've also developed internal guidance to streamline the IRB process. It's specific to projects using administrative data, and it's based on our own experiences and interviews we did with administrators of the IRBs a few years ago. So we have 2 guides for campus IRBs, UCLA and UC Berkeley. All projects that use state administrative data are required to go through the state IRB, and Evan will speak to this a little more later. We've developed a guide for navigating that process. We have a couple of project planning tools like decision trees and planning timelines, tips for speeding up the process, templates with stock language, especially if you're using our data hub that speak to kind of like the data security questions on IRBs. It's important to note that this is all internal guidance. So we're not an IRB, we're not the final say, but we think that these can be helpful in kind of anticipating how long things will take and recycling some language that we've already developed. Also wanted to note that IRB strategies and decisions tend to change over time, so we try to update our guidance as we learn. And I think I said final, but this is the final internal resource as our hash linkage toolkit, which you can locate at the URL on our screen. And this is a toolkit around privacy preserving linkages, specifically hash linkages, which is kind of our specialty, to facilitate linked administrative data. So the basic process is that a government partner that doesn't want to share PII will hash that PII and send it to CPL to host on the data hub. And then researchers will link that data on our secure server. So you can link data sets without having access to the underlying personally identifiable information. And as I mentioned previously, some examples of the linkages that we've facilitated across domains. The toolkit here contains a guide directed to government partners to help them decide if a hash linkage is appropriate for their goals. There's also a guide for technical staff who want to know more about the process for hashing and linking. And also our hashing and linking code is all publicly available on GitHub. And this is, ongoing work. We're learning how to make this process more efficient and user-friendly as we go. And we are always updating these resources, especially the code in GitHub, and just continually iterating. So with that, I will hand it back over to Evan.
Great. Thanks, Jen. I was just finishing up a comment to someone in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to talk, and this is sort of the bad news portion of the presentation that I got stuck with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent developments at the quote unquote state IRB, and also a development in terms of funding that we thought we might mention. So next slide, Nikta. So what some people refer to as a state IRB is actually the IRB for the Health and Human Services Agency. But it's really the only, well, as far as I'm aware of, it's the only IRB that a state agency runs. So it's often used for other agencies or other departments. And so people call it the state IRB. There's been some developments there that have been concerning, and we have been keeping a list of researchers up to date on what's been going on. And at this point, we are suggesting to folks that they take some action to try and prevent bad outcomes at the state IRB. So a brief overview of what's going on there. There are a few folks who are on the Committee for the Protection of Human Subjects at Cal HHS that are what I would describe as very skeptical of any research using previously existing administrative data, which, if you guys are familiar with the IRB regulations at the federal level, usually projects using pre-existing administrative data are treated with a lot less scrutiny by IRBs because there is no interaction with live human subjects, and so many of the risks that IRBs are concerned with are reduced. But this group has been working on a set of new regulations that we think would endanger lots of standard social science research projects, like many of you might be interested in doing. As an example, they sort of lay out several categories of projects that they are going to subject to greater scrutiny. One is projects using income data, which is like, probably a surprise to those of us who are in social science, given that that's such a common outcome that's being used. Another category is any project that involves data linkage. And I think most concerning is that they basically want to insert a consent requirement for projects using pre-existing administrative data, which is in most cases completely infeasible. It's not possible to go back and request consent to use administrative data, both because the number of individuals is so high, also because we often don't have that contact information. So anyways, these regulations have not passed yet. They haven't even gotten to the stage where they're being proposed, but they've been discussing drafts within the committee, and we're concerned enough that we're asking folks to reach out and make public comment, write a letter. We've heard from decision makers within the state, including folks who are going to decide whether or not to put forward these regulations, that they really want us to make our concerns on the record, and that helps them internally if they end up wanting to shut down these new regulations, which is the outcome that we would prefer. So put the link down there at the bottom. It gives you like a template letter if you're interested in staying involved. And also feel free to email me if you want to get on the list where I sort of keep there's about 100+ folks who I'm keeping up to date on what's happening at the state IRB. This is kind of an example of the type of things that we do that is another public good that CPL tries to provide for researchers around the state. Anyways, that's the developments at the state IRB. The other sort of bad news we wanted to relay was that had to do with a funding stream that we have received for the past 6 years from the UC Office of the President. We got something called the MRPI, which is Multi-Campus Research Programs and Initiatives. We received MRPI funding for 6 years from the Office of the President. It helped to fund a lot of really important programs that some folks on the call have actually taken advantage of, and dozens of other researchers take advantage of, especially graduate students, including our Sea Grant program, which covers some of the access fees we talked about. We had a graduate fellowship program where we gave stipends for graduate students doing work, policy-focused work that uses California's administrative data. We ran a summer institute for about a dozen undergrads from all over UC every summer for 4 summers. And then it also helped to fund the UCCCP. Our funding was not renewed for this cycle. They basically only provide this funding for new projects. I guess we're flagging this both because we're seeking new funding sources that you may be aware of. And we may ask for, if you end up working with CPL, we've started to ask for more testimonials from users to try and support our funding streams. And then we also always appreciate when we're working with you to help set up a project, if you're able to write us into a grant for $10,000 or $15,000, that really helps us be able to provision the services that we are trying to provide for researchers around the state. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. And I think Janie's going to do the wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. You want to just advance? I'm really just wrapping up what all of my colleagues have described so far during the presentation. Just to recap how the California Policy Lab can help you. We can help you connect to government partners. We will frequently advise researchers on, for example, what kinds of policy questions are really interesting to state and county partners, what motivates them, how to ask for data, how to apply for data. Every partner is different, but we're certainly collectively a resource on public agencies in California and how they think about research. We've covered a lot about how to access administrative data sets. We offer a secure data environment to host all of this data, and in a fashion that helps you remote in so that you don't have to have special equipment or go to a special location to do that. Our data environment is HIPAA compliant. We offer a data wiki, a lot of different kinds of documentation on our data holdings, current linkages, who the CPL point of contact is. We talked about data linkages, including privacy preserving record linkage processes. We have white papers on this, but we can also talk to you all in person if that's of high interest. And then Jen and Evan both talked about state IRB resources, both how to help you with IRB applications using our data sources and IRB strategy, but also these emerging policy issues that Evan just covered. Go to the next slide, please. So we do send a quarterly newsletter. It's a great way to stay in touch. It will talk about CPL research that's coming out that might be of interest, but we also do things like post job announcements at CPL. We will circulate partner information. We'll give you notices about new data sets, relevant legislation that's coming up. There's a link to sign up here if you want to receive these quarterly updates. We're also happy to distribute announcements or call outs for collaborators in our newsletter. Sean, how many people do we have on our newsletter right now? I should know this off the top of my head.
On our main newsletter list, close to 5,000 people, and on our quarterly email, it's upwards of 400.
So we're happy to distribute appropriate announcements that you may want distributed to our 5,000 person list. Our general email is info@calpolicylab.org. I think we've given you lots of emails and contact information. If you take anything away, if you email us here, someone will be able to get you to the right place eventually. And you can sign up for our monthly newsletter at this link below. And thanks, Sean, for chatting the links. We have a small group, so I'll just stop there and see if any of you have questions that you haven't already put in the chat. We've got some really thoughtful, interesting questions so far, but let me just pause here and see if anyone wants to ask a question in person.
Don't all jump in at once.
Oh, I was going to ask a question. Sorry. Hi, my name is
Great.
Bartimus. I was wondering if you CPL had any collaborations existing with DHCS. I'm really interested in their medical data because of some of the research that I do that can't be captured with the TIMSIS data. And I've heard they're difficult to get data directly from the state. I also am trying to hedge my bets and considering that we really don't know what's going on with CMS in terms of having data in-house in the longer term. And, kicking off these projects, data cleaning can sometimes take a year or two. So 2026 is actually coming really close to us already.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. So we don't have like an active partnership with DHCS. In part, that's because, as you know, they have an open data request process. So, but we actually have not requested data through that process ourselves. We know that many people do it with some success. We also have heard something similar to what you have heard, which is that they can be a little bit persnickety about they don't approve everything, and they are definitely going to ask a lot of questions and follow-up questions about your application. Like, are you sure? Why do you need this, variable? Are you sure you need 5 years as opposed to just 3? They're very focused on, call it, data minimization. So they're going to ask you a lot of questions about, whether something's necessary for the project. So that's what that's I'm happy to talk more about that, but we just don't have a lot of experience with that process.
Yeah.
But it's definitely there and available, and we do work closely with Cal HHS, which is the agency that oversees DHCS, as well as several other health related departments. So there may be ways that we can be helpful, but I think that application process, my understanding is I'm not sure how many ways we can be helpful with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd still be interested to hear your high-level thoughts on that. Maybe I'll just email you separately, because we're writing something that, as an investigator, is useful, which is a really, really broad request for data, so that we're flexible and not doing it again. However, the opposite approach is to just do something very narrow in scope that is maybe more defendable to them. And yeah, so I'd be interested in your take. So I'll email you separately. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Just to make sure it didn't get lost in the shop, I'm going to put the link in for the IRB overview and how to get involved as well. It's in the chat.
Thanks, Sean. Any other questions about anything we covered or didn't cover?
Hi, I have a question. My name's Jacqueline Brown. I was named Nikta earlier, but I think I changed it. I don't know how that happened.
We're all Nikta today.
I'm curious. I came onto this call because I had read about the California college data linkage that's in process, and I'm just curious sort of what the timeline is on that and how that's going to function within CPL and CSHE.
I take that one. So we've been working for the last several years on projects about primarily about college student use of CalFresh benefits. CalFresh is California's name for SNAP. As part of that, we linked together community college data with UC data and with the FAFSAs from the Student Aid Commission. We're continuing to work with that and working with the partners to kind of identify other research projects that they're interested in pursuing with those linked data. We're also working on bringing CSU in, although we're not there yet. We don't have a finalized data use agreement with them yet. So it's in our systems. We're not advertising that as something that people can very easily get access to yet, because we still haven't really paved that road super well. So we have some experience with it. The community colleges are pretty open to bringing in outside researchers, but not all of the partners have kind of demonstrated that interest. And so we don't want to advertise it and then not be able to deliver.
Of course.
But I think if there's a project you're interested in, feel free to reach out to us and we will let you know what we think the prospects are.
Great.
We just don't want to make promises.
I'll keep my eye out also I'm relatively early in my PhD, so I have time. Thank you.
And I believe, just for the sake of comprehensiveness, we're also linking on the credit panel data to the student support linkage. So in addition to the data sets that Jesse just mentioned, also the credit data.
Yeah, I had spoken with Zach Bleemer about this last year, and he said that this was in the works. So I've been keeping my eye out for a while now, but it's nice to see it coming together.
Yeah, we would be remiss if we didn't also mention that there is a state level effort to link a lot of education data called the Cradle to Career Data System, which has been a many years process that will take many years more probably before has sort of everything that you might want, but that is linking data from the 3 higher ed segments with workforce data from the Employment Development Department, so earnings, and then eventually also with data from Health and Human Services, CalFresh enrollments. I think there are some variables from DHCS that was, and from Department of Public Health and HCI. So worth keeping an eye on that process. My sort of amateur opinion, having closely watched it, is that it'll probably be another year or two before they start doing data rollouts for researchers to get access to the sort of person level linked data. But it's certainly a great step in the right direction to have these data linked at the state level. Frankly, we wouldn't have done all this work at CPL had it sort of been done by the state already, which I think is a good role for the state. But in the absence of it being done by the state, we've sort of taken it on ourselves to do a lot of it and hope to provide those public goods to other researchers.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will keep my eye out for that process also. I really appreciate it.
Maybe a related question. I'm wondering if you've ever had issues with like political conflicts with the state, so I'm in a disability studies lab, and so like we're generally quite opposed to increasing the institutionalization and coercion of disabled people, which conflicts with a few state policies. So I'm wondering if you've ever had issues with like the framing of the research conflicting with like causing the agency to not want to hand over the data.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, in the sense that most of our work is done in partnership with state agencies. So most of the work that we do is of mutual agreement, let's call it. So there are plenty of projects we want to do that they don't want to do, and vice versa, right? There's plenty of projects that are not sort of interesting to us as researchers that they want us to do. So we're really working in the overlap there. And I would say that anything that, I think getting approval for a project, sometimes we're able to, leverage our existing relationships to help projects get approved. Sometimes people come with their own relationships, and they have sort of a tacit green light from the agency already, and they're just sort of using our data use agreements and our data infrastructure to host the data. But there are certainly lots of projects that don't get approved. Yeah, it's yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess I'd say when you're writing your proposal of a project description, frame it in a way that explains why it would be useful to the agency, if you can. And if you can't, then we're probably not going to be the right route to the project you want to do.
Got it. Awesome.
I should say we also like have a policy with all of our agency partners, our government partners, of not surprising them with gotcha research, right? Like that's how we keep the relationships ongoing. So like there's pre-publication review periods for all of our data use agreements where like they get a chance to see the research and respond to it. Doesn't necessarily mean that, what the final product is going to change, but often it does. So anyways, just sort of a sense of how we work with our government partners.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I'm sure you're aware, but the Constitution guarantees an intellectual right of freedom, and that's our freedom or intellectual freedom, and that's written into every DUA. So that's the baseline, right? Like we are independent researchers, and we're going to report our findings. And this process that Evan described, in my experience, we're not changing the nature of the findings, and often the input makes the research better. I find that a lot of our government partners have really important insights about their data or the people in their programs that help improve us. Most of our publications, frankly, are not flattering. So, but they're done in a way where whoever is affected by them at least has a heads up and can take action on it, which is ultimately what we want. It's not that they always take action, but anyway, yeah. So because we're at the University of California, every DUA we sign guarantees that we can publish our findings.
Right. And because there's no veto at the end of the process, the veto is at the beginning, right? So like the government partners won't take on a project that they're worried the results might come out in a way that they would have a problem with. Because once they green light something, then there's, the results come out whichever way they come out.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful.
Well, if there are any other questions, speak now or forever hold your peace, or just send us an email later. But maybe now is a good time to wrap it up, and thank you all for taking the time to come to this session. We welcome questions. We welcome feedback about ways that we can be a better use within our model. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.